Okay, the small intestine is our organ that is made for absorption. If you were to stretch it out, it's about 10 feet long from your stomach to where it ends at the large intestine. There are 3 parts to it: the duodenum, which connects directly to the stomach, the jejunum, and the ileum. The ileum ends at what's called the ileocecal valve because it connects at that point to the cecum. The mucosal layer of the small intestines have a lot of histological significance. There's a lot of different types of cells that are going on and a lot of different features that help the small intestine do its job. The small intestine is adapted for absorption. There's a lot of digestion that occurs there, but it's really about absorption in order to take in all of the nutrients that you've just taken time to digest. And the features that the small intestine have increase its surface area 600 times. And there's 3 main features that we talk about that increase the surface area of the small intestines. 1 are called villi. And villi are finger-like projections of the mucosal layer. There's about 30 for every square millimeter, and they basically just kind of look like that. And so that the surface of the small intestines is not smooth. What's inside of them? Inside of them are veins and arteries, which to the smallest level become what's called capillaries and allow the nutrients to go directly into the bloodstream. Additionally, there are vessels called lacteals, which are part of the immune system to help fight off microbes as well. The other structures that allow the surface area to be increased significantly are called microvilli. And microvilli are tiny projections on the cell membrane of the simple columnar epithelial tissue that, again, further increase the surface area. So a columnar cell looks just like this, and basically it too has that kind of wavy pattern on the top of it. This is called the brush border or the microvilli. So it allows the chyme to be exposed to digestive enzymes, and it allows the food that's been digested to pass into the cell from the lumen. And finally, there is, in the submucosal layer, another layer of folding called the plica circularis. It's also called circular folds. You can find both terms. And that causes the chyme to spiral rather than to shoot straight through the small intestine. This is a picture of what the circular folds look like. Lots of different cells in the small intestine. The ones we were just talking about, the simple columnar absorptive cells, are the ones with the microvilli. Goblet cells secrete mucus. Enteroendocrine cells are the ones that are secreting hormones. We'll talk about those a little bit later. And Paneth cells are for phagocytosis. They secrete lysosome, which is a special kind of enzyme in cells that can digest things like microbes and stuff like that, things that you will actually eat anytime that you eat. So again, this large layer is called a villus, singular is a villus, and then within that villus is this brush border there. On the surface of it is the microvilli. So what kind of cells do we have going on there? Absorptive cells we already talked about, and that whole crevice thing is called a gland, intestinal gland, and a gland is essentially a unit that's made up of several different cells together that work together to secrete a substance. In this case, it's going to be secreting some of the intestinal juices. What's in those intestinal juices? Mucus, secreted by goblet cells, secretin, secreted by S cells, and secretin is what tells the pancreas to release more pancreatic juice because some of the contents from the stomach have been dumped into the duodenum. CCK cells, which secretes cholecystokinin, and that also secretes pancreatic juice. It also causes bile to be ejected from the bladder, makes you feel full, that's what satiety means, and then slows down the stomach from emptying its contents in the duodenum. And then K cells, which secrete GIP, and that stimulates the release of insulin by the pancreatic beta cells. Remember, insulin, we got to remember our phrase here, lag, HIBI. Insulin is secreted by the beta cells in response to high blood glucose levels. So as we digest our food, it stands to reason that our blood glucose levels are going to go up, and in order to keep that in check, keep that in balance, insulin is released. So just some more information on what intestinal juice is. Remember, it has a pH that's slightly basic. It's not very basic, but we need to counteract the acidity of the contents that came from the stomach. And again, the intestinal juices get reabsorbed by the microvilli, and chyme, the contents of the chyme is also absorbed as it passes by the cells. Lactose intolerance are for people who are missing the enzyme lactase. You can take a supplement if you're lactose intolerant. It's called Lactaid. And Lactaid even makes a milk now that is lactose free. And there's many companies that make a lactose free milk so that you can still drink milk. You just don't have the milk sugar in it. But you have to have this enzyme in order to digest milk sugar when the milk sugar is called lactose. Enzymes are very specific. So you can have 30 other enzymes that will digest sugars, but if you don't have the one called lactase, you're not going to break down the lactose. So what happens if you do eat that dairy product? You'll get some symptomology. You'll get diarrhea. In some cases, you'll get very gaseous and feel really bloated. And it could cause cramping as well. And you can get all the stuff that you get from dairy, you can get in another area. You can get the protein, you can get the fat, and you can certainly get the calcium as well. So, like I said, the small intestine is all about absorption. We have to digest the food to make them small enough so that they can actually get into the bloodstream. Most of the absorption from the body, 90% of it takes place in the small intestines. So there are many different ways that cells transport products into their cells, and we went into them extensively in your baby bio classes. So for example, glucose, whoops, I keep doing that on accident, sorry. Glucose and another simple sugar called galactose have to be taken into the cell via active transport. If you remember from baby bio, active transport means they go from areas of low to high concentration. And because that's kind of not the natural way for things to go, we have to use a little bit of energy in order to bring it into the cell. Fructose, which is another simple sugar, however, is not as present in the cells, and so but it's still too big to just pass right through, so it goes through a process called facilitated diffusion, where it needs a channel protein in order to pass by the membrane. Don't worry too much about these terms, active transport, diffusion, facilitated diffusion. That's not going to be the emphasis. Just know that all of these substances are going to go right into the membrane through the small intestine. So one of the things that we mentioned in that last slide is that water is also one of the things that's absorbed in the small intestine. Some of it gets absorbed in the stomach, and a big chunk of it is also going to be reabsorbed into the small intestine. So we produce about 9 liters of fluid. Now we're not even talking about just drinking water there. That's how much we produce in our GI tract every day. And the small intestine is going to grab most of it right back. So this diagram is kind of showing we produce about 1 liter of saliva a day, plus any liquids we ingest, plus our stomach produces a couple liters of gastric juice, and so on and so forth. So most of that is going to get reabsorbed right away in the small intestine. And then of that last liter that's left, the rest of it is going to get absorbed in the large intestine. Most of it, 90% of it. So there's not going to be a whole lot of liquid left in the large intestine when it gets to the rectum and is ready to be eliminated. So where do the nutrients that are absorbed go? Well, they go into the villus. This is a single villus right here, and it is going to have those capillaries in the background right here. And the food particles that you have digested and absorbed are going to go into the capillary, which is then going to make its way via a venule and make its way to the liver, and then up to the heart, and then out to the lungs to grab oxygen, and then keep circulating those nutrients around the body. So the blood, the whole reason we have blood is that it's a delivery system for nutrients and oxygen. Here's a practice quiz. I recommend pausing and taking it. Here's the answers. All right, large intestine. Our large intestine is our last route through the digestive system, and we start at the ileocecal sphincter, which is right here, and that is right there where the ileum ended, and it's going to go right into the cecum, and that's our starting point. Now, the appendix is not actually a place in which food will pass through. I don't know that it's necessarily considered an accessory structure, but I guess based on the definition, we could call it that. The appendix, from the cecum, we go from the cecum to the ascending, to the transverse, to the descending, to the sigmoid, to the rectum, and then down out into the anus. So what do we have going on in the large intestine histologically? Well, we do have some of our absorptive cells, again, with the microvilli. We got lots of goblet cells that are going to secrete mucus in order to help move the digested food along as it starts to form into feces. So the absorptive cells here, though, are grabbing water because by this time most of the rest of our digested food and good particles and nutrients have already been absorbed in the small intestine. It's much smoother than the rest of the GI tract. There are no villi, there's no plica circularis. The internal part of it is a lot smoother when you compare it to the other parts. The muscular layer of the large intestine has some unique features. And really, the muscular layer of each section is slightly different of the GI tract. What's different here is that we have an internal circular layer, which we have in all of the GI tract. But what's interesting is that the outer layer is made of longitudinal muscle, and it gives it a banded appearance. It's this band right here that goes across and down. That is referred to as the taenia coli, or the longitudinal bands. And what that does is because of the way that it contracts, it creates these pouches called haustra. And the taenia coli kind of contract and create these little pouches, and that pouches causes the food, or in this case waste products, is really where we're at this point, to move from haustra to haustra to haustra as it moves along the GI tract. And then, of course, the serosal layer is our visceral peritoneum. So the appendix used to be considered what we call a vestigial structure, and it still is vestigial to some degree. Scientists just kind of don't really understand it too much, but they're starting to find now that it does in fact serve at least somewhat of a purpose, in that it's a storage place for our bacterial flora. So here's a little bit more about the appendix. I kind of mentioned all of that right there. So the downside to the appendix, though, is that even though it may or may not do anything for you, the downside is it can do bad things for you, in that it can become blocked, it can become inflamed. If there's some kind of if you swallow something and it gets stuck there, if it can become cancerous. My dad had a cancer on the tip of his appendix. If it gets kinked, or even just a bad set of microbes in your gut, can irritate it and cause what's called appendicitis. And appendicitis is going to be lower right quadrant. A lot of people, hold their left side and go, I think it's appendicitis. I'm like, no, your appendix is on the right side of your body. And you want to really make sure that if you're having those significant pains, that you get treated right away, because if the appendix bursts, it can be very, very dangerous, because you're exposing your body to these microbes and this infection in a place where it can't be helped very easily. So you need to make sure that you get it taken care of if you do feel those types of pains. The rectum and the anus. The rectum is the end of the colons, and the last little bit of it is called the anal canal. It's the last 1 inch. That's kind of that area where you're going, well, I think I gotta go to the bathroom, like right now. That's the anal canal. And then the outside of it is called the anus, and we have a sphincter, 2 sphincters actually. The internal one, which is smooth muscle, which is not really in our control, and the outer one, which is skeletal muscle, which we do kind of control. Proctologists are the folks you see if you have an issue in the rectal or anal area, and one issue might be hemorrhoids. Hemorrhoids are basically, this kind of got cut off here, but varicose veins that cause inflammation and swelling and possibly bleeding from the rectum. And it can be caused by all kinds of things, but our biggies are friction, wiping, birthing, and wiping and friction kind of go hand in hand. Be gentle on that little guy. There's no need to wipe like it's the dirtiest thing on the planet. And by forcing defecation. So there's no reason to sit there and push really hard and make all kinds of weird noises to force something to come out that isn't ready. So this is an example of an external hemorrhoid. They can be internal or they can be external. And if they get bad enough, you can have them surgically removed. So the large intestine is more about mechanical digestion than chemical digestion here. All kinds of things going on here. Because of the smooth muscle, we're going to be talking about mechanical digestion. So what have we got going on? First of all, there's peristalsis. Once chyme has gotten into this area, you're going to have from 3 to 12 contractions per minute. And one of the things that happens right away is that as soon as you eat food, you get what's called mass peristalsis or mass movements. So you eat food, so anything that is in your large intestine at the time is going to start kind of moving its way out so that it can be empty for incoming food to come into. And while that's going on, you have the haustral churning, which is where the chyme moves from pouch to pouch. You have the gastroileal reflex, which is, if you look at that term, gastro means stomach, ileal means ileum. So when the stomach is full, so that's the stomach part of this, the hormone gastrin tells the ileocecal sphincter to relax so that the small intestine contents will empty into the large intestine. So these two things, the gastroileal reflex and the mass peristalsis, are both in response to food being in the stomach. They're basically clearing out room in order to allow the next set of food to come in. The defecation reflex is your pooping reflex, and it's when waste goes into the rectum, it causes the receptors in the walls to stretch out, and that tells you, oh, I've got one on deck that needs to come out. So again, external is voluntarily controlled, and when it's relaxed, we allow contents to come out, and when it's constricted, we're not letting anything come out, unless it's a non-negotiable. So again, no enzymes in the large intestine for chemical digestion, but we do have these guys right here, the bacterial flora, which are going to be responsible for taking any of our undigested contents and having their way with them. Little bacteria that live inside our gut, in our cecum and ascending colon, and they're going to create gases as part of that. And that's, like I said, one of the reasons why we have gas is because of our bacteria. But they also produce 2 vitamins for us. They produce vitamin K and vitamin B for our bodies. This is just a cool picture of some bacterial flora. As I said, scientists didn't know the role that bacteria play in the human body. And recent studies have suggested that we actually are made up of more bacterial cells than we are human cells, if you count the bacteria that are living in our gut. So the future of immune studies could be all about what are your bacteria and what are they doing. So this is just really kind of a cool aside as far as this goes. This got cut off here, but naturally occurring bacteria that you have in your gut that are sometimes associated with bad things, but they're not bad because they're in your body. It's when you get them from an outside source, is like E. coli, Escherichia coli, Staphylococcus, we also know it as staph. Several different types of yeast are in there as well, but it's all about balance. So the E. coli that's in your body is going to be a little different than the E. coli you might accidentally ingest when you eat unwashed spinach. And that your body will not be happy with. So again, we talked about ways to restore this. You can take probiotics. You can eat yogurt with live and active cultures. And yeah, it's just pretty cool. Feces and flatulence. Feces is anything that's undigested and unabsorbed. And really, feces is a whole lot of bacteria as well. You're actually going to pass some of your bacteria in your poop. Estimation is about 7 pounds a day. And I often get asked, like, how many times should you poop a day? And the answer might be surprising. Some studies suggest you should be pooping at least 2 or 3 times a day. If you're a single day pooper, that doesn't mean that you're not healthy, but maybe you should consider eating more fiber and a little bit less of those sugary carbohydrate foods. Flatus is the other one. Everybody farts. And flatus is the technical term for a fart, and it's the gas that are produced by bacteria. When they break down the foods, we get about 1 gallon of it a day. And it's coming out one way or another. Some of it will come out when we defecate, and some of it might come out when you least expect it. Absorption in the large intestine, we basically, since most of the nutrients are gone, the only thing left, and when I say nutrients, I'm talking about the food part of the substances, the glucose, the proteins, the amino acids, all that kind of stuff. By this time, almost all of that's gone. And so in the large intestine, you're going to grab any electrolytes that are left. The ones we're most familiar with are sodium and chloride. Most of the water that's left, we're going to absorb those vitamins that were just made by the bacteria. And that's pretty much about it. So by the time that the feces reaches the transverse colon, it's starting to become a solid mass. We already discussed defecation, but the defecation is caused by another reflex called the gastro, which means stomach, and then colic, which means colon, gastrocolic reflex, which causes feces to move into the rectum. And like I said, those stretch receptors are going to tell the nerve that, yo, we got something ready to go, and when you're ready, you go. Defecation problems. Well, diarrhea is what happens when chyme just goes flying through the intestines, like it or not. And when it goes through so quickly, the water doesn't get absorbed the way it's supposed to. What can cause it? Well, gosh, what doesn't cause it? Can be pretty much anything. Stress, infection, being sick, medications cause diarrhea, and the biggest side effect you have to worry about with chronic diarrhea, which means diarrhea that's lasting more than a day or more, is dehydration. This is actually particularly true in adults more than kids. But when that chyme is just passing through there and all that water would normally get reabsorbed in our body is actually going out of our body, we have to make sure we stay hydrated. So if you are having major diarrhea issues, you should also be drinking water to replenish the water that has been lost. Constipation is the opposite. Constipation is when feces is not coming out in a regular basis. A lot of times this is because of the opposite. It's moving too slowly through the intestines, and consequently too much water is reabsorbed, and so it's not moving through the way it should. What can cause that? Again, lots of things. In fact, many of the same things that can cause diarrhea can cause constipation. Everybody's different. But not moving and not exercising is a big one, because movement stimulates your intestines to move food around. So even skeletal muscle movement, it stimulates your body to move food. Not drinking a lot of fluids. This is probably the biggest reason why people get constipated, is because they're not eating fiber. When I'm talking about fiber, I'm talking about vegetables, skins on fruits, whole grains, that kind of a thing. So again, a lot of times the answer is just change your diet a little bit. You can also take a stool softener or a laxative that can kind of make everything move along the way it's supposed to. So this is just a little bit about fiber. There's two types of fiber that we eat. Insoluble is fiber that is the parts of plants that we cannot actually digest. I'm going to get a little gross on you for a second, but everybody has seen corn and poop before. And the reason why you see what looks like an entire kernel is because your body cannot break down the cellulose in plant cell membranes. So you might think, well, then why in the heck should we eat it? Well, it's actually good to eat it, because if you remember that the inside of the intestines is like this, so maybe something gets stuck here. And if you're eating things that are kind of branchy, there's my drawing of a branch, it can grab that as it moves through the intestine and kind of clean it out, which is really cool. So that's one of the reasons why we should eat foods that are whole and unprocessed. Sorry, couldn't think of the right word there. And then another type of fiber is soluble fiber, and this is the stuff that kind of has a little bit more of a jelly consistency. So beans, oats, the white parts of citrus. So when you eat an orange, you know that white stemmy, peely thing that's on the outside of it. Apples are considered soluble fiber. And that helps to lower your blood cholesterol because it stops your liver from using too much cholesterol. So it's kind of a really good thing to do. A lot of people that have cholesterol issues are told to increase their soluble fiber. How is gastric secretion and motility regulated in the brain? Well, we have the cephalic phase. That's the stomach phase where we're prepping for food. What's going on in the brain there? Well, we've got the cerebral cortex, which is where we sense all of the things that have to do with food. The sight, the smell, the taste, the thought of food. The hypothalamus starts the secretion of gastric juices. It also, remember, is our hunger and satiety centers right there. So it tells us, oh, hey, I'm hungry right now, or I'm full, let's slow it down. And then the vagus nerve, our largest cranial nerve in the body, goes down into the stomach and the abdominal cavity and increases the activity of the glands that are there. In the gastric phase, that's when the stomach is doing its thing. The stomach is stretched out a little bit from food, and those are stretch receptors that sense that. Different receptors called chemoreceptors detect the gastric juices. And then in the intestinal phase, the stomach empties its contents into the duodenum. And in the duodenum, we have different receptors that sense that food that's there now by the stretch, and also chemoreceptors that detect the fatty acids and the glucose that's there. So again, feeding center is the part of the hypothalamus that tells us, hey, I'm hungry. And the reason that it tells us that is because it's detecting low blood glucose levels. And even though we can adjust to those low blood glucose levels by breaking glycogen into glucose, we can also just increase them by eating something. And then the satiety center tells you, whoa, slow your roll, you've eaten too much. But there is a bit of a gap between actually being full and knowing that your brain knowing that you're full. Some estimates say anywhere between 8 to 20 minutes. 8's probably about the average, though. Here's another practice quiz. Take it. And here's the answers.